Hello, everyone. Welcome to World Affairs webinar series on international careers. I'm Philip Yun, the CEO. Before we start, I wanted to give a little background for those of you who are new as to why we're here. This series came out of an ongoing education program that we have here at World Affairs. We've engaged, hundreds of students, possibly thousands, over college students and high school students over the many years that World Affairs has been doing this. And, in this time of sheltering in, we found that more and more people, especially younger people, are starting to think about priorities. Some people have a little more time on their hands, and the world has changed so drastically that I think it's quite appropriate for people to be a lot more introspective about what they're doing and how they're doing it. And I think especially the younger people who are interested in what we do are always thinking about how to make a meaningful impact on the world, and in the sense, because of where we are, their careers, what is making sense. So we wanted to do, instead of doing these live programs in person, we decided to make the huge pivot and really go remotely. And we thought what we could do is bring what I thought were some really accomplished individuals who are earlier in their careers. And one of the things that I thought about were people who had made drastic changes or transitions that are actually somewhat probably not in the usual vein of what you normally see, and that they combine some really different and interesting sort of disciplines together. And so that's what we've been trying to do. So this is very much an experiment, and Lovely is one person who we have here who I think exemplifies that. So how does that sound, Lovely? Is that all right?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so I am pleased to introduce to you Lovely Umayam. She's the founder of Bombshelltoe, a creative incubator linking arts, community organizers, and nuclear experts. She's a non-proliferation expert herself. She was previously at the Stimson Center, a very highly regarded think tank in Washington, D.C., and now she's in Los Angeles, which is a story in and of itself that I'm sure she's going to tell us about. And the reason why I met Lovely was that she was a grantee, again, when I was at Plowshares Fund. And what we always try to do is find up-and-coming newcomers who are looking at the world in a different way. And I think that Lovely is a perfect description of that. When I think of your career and I think of things, one of our people who we had guests on talked about in the past, people succeeded by conforming, like being like everybody else. But now in this new age where we have so many different things happening, when there are so many opportunities via computer and telecom, AI, the person said the new world is now about letting your differences shine and taking you to different places to find essentially what your interests are and your curiosity takes you. So that's the preface, because I think, Lovely, you're the perfect person to talk us about. So let's get to these rapid questions here. We got 5 or 6, all right? Don't feel like you have to go through them really, really fast. But I just wanted to cover all these in the next 20 minutes or so, okay?
I'm game, yeah.
I want you to tell us a bit about your current job and what you like doing about it.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you, Philip and World Affairs, for having me. I've always considered myself as a perpetual learner, so I'm flattered and honored to be a teacher with our time together. Yeah. So my current job right now is I'm trying to build up my passion project for the last several years called Bombshelltoe. And as you've mentioned, it's this collaborative space that brings together historians, scientists, policy practitioners, experts with artists in order to translate, heavy technical information regarding nuclear issues like arms control and disarmament in ways that are more relatable to the broader public. So I've, the genesis of that is I've always seen myself as an artist first, as a creative first, even though, for the past 9 years of my life, I've really focused on policy. And
nuclear non-proliferation too, right?
Yes, nuclear non-proliferation, to be more specific. And for those who are not as familiar, that's really the study of, preventing the spread of nuclear weapons and protecting nuclear materials. And, that could be a completely different conversation maybe later down the line as we go through your rapid questions as to how I got to that topic to begin with. But as I sort of worked through the motions of becoming a nuclear policy expert, I've gone through the traditional conformist route, so to speak. I did the government stint, worked at an amazing and supportive NGO. But the model that I really wanted to create for myself is one that really feels truly creative and multidisciplinary. Because if you look at nuclear history, it's not just purely technical. I think that there's something about the word nuclear that elicits emotion out of us because of the fear and destruction that it's associated with. And so I really wanted to experiment and push that further. And that's how Bombshelltoe came to be. And I think, I see this as not necessarily replacing traditional research models when it comes to the field, but really complementing it so that we can really encourage the next generation of people, thinkers, to really care about this issue that sometimes is really too abstract for them to relate to.
As part of your career path, you talked about working for, some very prestigious organizations. I mean, being an artist and being a nuclear expert, I mean, they're not normally two things that go together in most people's minds. So how did that come about for you? I mean, you obviously had that artistic creator streak in you, and then yet you decided to go into nuclear weapons. I mean, what was that all about?
Yeah, it's if I'm being honest, it sort of just happened. When you look at my resume, it looks like everything is planned neatly. But in all honesty, it was definitely meandering. But I would say that there are three sort of guiding stars in my life. So one is I love culture. I love consuming and also practicing art. And that's why I think of myself as an artist or a creative first and foremost. The second is I deeply care about community. I grew up in Los Angeles. I started off doing community organizing work around where I grew up in Filipino town in LA. And the third, which I think became sort of the pull in terms of going into the foreign policy route, is I love seeing and experiencing the world. As a child of immigrants, I've always been curious about the lives on the other side beyond the border. And so in undergrad, I wanted to see where my study of that would take me. And so that then ended up, leading me to the international security side of things. And from there, focusing a little bit more about nuclear policy. And I didn't really become interested in nuclear policy the way that most people do, about deterrence theory or, sort of the military calculations that go into it. I was more interested in the historical perspective, the cultural perspective, why certain countries decided to pursue nuclear weapons or rolled back and decided that they didn't want it anymore. Because I think that there is a lot of cultural considerations in that. And so that was the reason why I gravitated towards it. And over time, because the nuclear expert world is pretty small relative to other fields, I just got to know people who decided to embrace me and mentor me, and I got good at it over time. And that's really how it came to be. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about mentors, and let's talk about what is the best career advice or sets of advice that people gave you as you were sort of navigating figuring out who you were and what you
Oh my gosh. Yeah, a couple of things. Develop grit.
Develop grit. Okay.
Develop grit. However you would want to interpret that, knowing yourself. So for me, there was a point where, and I think this is a very common DC advice, you know, network, you know, just apply for things. And I really had to overcome like imposter syndrome, not thinking that, oh, well, I don't have the experience to do this, or, oh, I don't really know how this so-and-so person would receive me if I cold called them or cold emailed them. And I just had to develop a sense of grit and just trying and being okay if it doesn't work out. And that's, I can't count how many times it just didn't work out. But I think through the process of just trying, I've figured out what worked for me. You know, I'm not the type of person when I network, I'm not the type of person that tries to get to know everyone. I've realized I'm the type of person that needs to do research beforehand to see who's going to be there and who I can connect with beyond just a work level and be friends with, because I actually really like you know, their expertise, and there's a genuine interest in having a relationship with that person. And the same thing with applications, just getting through that hump of thinking that you're not going to get it anyway. And so I think it's just developing that grit and giving yourself, you know, that chance to either succeed or fail would be one advice. And just really quickly, the second advice is try to be multidisciplinary. And I think maybe this is unique to me because, again, I'm both a creative and a policy analyst or policy practitioner. But it's just, I think that there's richness in the intersection of abilities, if that makes sense. Because I think you just find your own voice and no one can take that away from you. And there are some people who are, well, you know, you don't really see poet, diplomat, you know, like that's not really the mesh that people think about. But it's actually existed, right? Pablo Neruda, Chilean senator, poet, you know, diplomat, you know, so there are people who have existed and continue to exist in multidisciplinary spaces. And I think that would give you an edge if you can really find that for yourself.
What advice would you give someone in high school and in college right now? I mean, it's kind of a difficult time. Some people are probably maybe not in college, but are, I mean, out of the workforce right now or in the workforce and are thinking about a transition in a different way. So what would you tell them about, you know, what should they be doing? What would you give advice about?
Yeah, this will sound very simple, but I think it's very relevant to the times. I would say, you know, just don't lose yourself. I think when it comes to the professional track, nowadays we think about output and being productive, which is still, you know, very true. But I think especially now that, you know, the pandemic has really shifted our priorities, you know, it's really good to be able to identify what anchors you and what motivates you. So even when you're, you know, switching gears, either, you know, trying to look at college prospects or trying to shift careers, I think this is like actually a perfect time to understand your drivers. Because the world in some ways is in a standstill, pretty bad standstill, but it's also a moment to breathe. And I think being able to calibrate within you, like why, you know, what your drivers are, who you are as a person, and how you want that to affect your work will be really helpful, because I think employers or potential mentors will see that immediately. And I think that that's really what makes people stand out, is if they're very much aligned with who they are, and you can see that projected or manifested in their work. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean output right now or content production right now. It's just about understand. I guess another way of saying it is finding your voice. And also, because there is some time, you know, to reflect, it's also really understanding who you admire. And this might be a little bit strange, but I was reflecting on this in preparation for this conversation, and I couldn't really think of favorite diplomats or policymakers. Like maybe some people have that, but for me, because I know myself, I have favorite artists, I have favorite writers, and I'm very attuned to their voice, and I try to borrow and emulate in order to craft my voice. And I think that may be a really interesting exercise for those who are trying to switch or trying to move up, is to like really understand your voice by way of really honing in on who inspires you. And it doesn't have to be just because you're a policy expert. It doesn't have to be a policy person. It could be, you know, a cartoonist, you know, but really understanding why.
What do you think people can do now to make a difference?
Oh, I love that. So I've also been reflecting on that separately from this conversation, but I would say it would be imagining and vocalizing alternative futures is my thing right now.
Alternative futures, okay.
Yeah, or reimagining alternative futures. And so speaking of one of my favorite authors, Ocean Vuong, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's like an up-and-coming novelist, poet, and he said in a recent interview, he said something to the effect of, you know, a lot of people say the future is in your hands, you know, you've heard of that, but he actually said, if you think about it, really what we mean by that is the future is in your mouth, because you have to imagine and also articulate what you want the future to be. And I think that's incredibly powerful, especially at this time where everything seems so uncertain, you know, because one thing that this pandemic or the bad economy cannot take away from you is your own thoughts and your own thinking. And you can always imagine. Another favorite writer of mine, Arundhati Roy, she had this amazing article about a month ago commenting on the pandemic. And she said something to the effect of, you know, the pandemic is actually a portal to see what works, what isn't working, and what you want to work. And so that's what I mean by just reimagining futures, manifesting that future in your own way. And it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, create a model that will change the world. Like one person cannot do that.
Right.
But what does it mean to have intentions towards taking that little step as an individual to do so? And also just taking care of yourself and being okay if you're not productive at the moment. You know, I think my generation really struggles with that. And again, just breathing through this time is really important. And it might feel like you're losing out, you know, maybe not being able to go to college or not the right time to change careers. And from my, you know, again, being honest in this dialogue, you know, it's a really hard time to you know, incubate Bombshelltoe. You know, it's I'm trying to make it its own thing, and this is quite a challenge. But you know, it's okay to take your time, because time is actually an opportunity to make it better or refine yourself in other ways.
Was this the job you thought you would be doing when you were in high school and college? What experience or classes in high school and college most prepared you for this career? And you better put a good answer for that one, okay? Parents may not like the answer you may give. And what do you wish you studied more in school?
Oh my God, that's amazing. I love these questions. Okay, so, well, I thought I was going to be a poet. I thought I was going to be a traveling poet. I was going to be a spoken word artist. That's what I wanted to be in high school. And that's why I feel like at my core, I'm an artist, because I love the stage. I love writing. I write for myself. I love being published. I love sharing my word. And I feel like actually my high school education was instrumental to that. My favorite classes were English. I was part of this truly phenomenal organization based in Los Angeles called Right Girl, and they're still around, where they pair, you know, young girls with writers, you know, of all types. And my mentor, Allison Deegan, like really helped, you know, helped me find my voice, my artistic voice in high school. And so, and I would not have it any differently. I think, if anything, I would have wished to have studied history more. Because I think if I retained a little bit more historical knowledge, I feel like I would have, I would be a little bit more sharp now. But I think part of the reason why I didn't retain a lot of information is because of the way that we, you know, we teach history. It's very, again, passive.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to relate to. And so the subjects that I really gravitated to were English. And I went to undergrad at Reed College thinking that I was going to be a creative writing major. And I graduated as a, you know, political science major. And it was then that I transitioned from thinking that my words as an artist will carry me through my adulthood to really the policy thinking. And that's why it feels messy. It's very my journey is meandering, because that switch feels arbitrary. There isn't really a real good reason for it. But that's why I'm here.
Yeah. So someone asked, here's another very practical and I guess practical question is, do you think an advanced degree to be successful in your field is necessary? Which field? You know, art or, you know, so
yes and yeah. So the practical policy-hatted part of me that's experienced Washington, D.C. says yes, just because of the competition, right? When you're sifting through resumes, like you look at the educational experience. But that might change. And the personal side of me says no, actually, because a lot of my knowledge is accrued by experience. You know, in terms of understanding nuclear policy, I got that through unpaid internships, which is labor still, right? I got it from the fellowship at the Department of Energy, where I just learned what the bureaucracy looks like and how people, like, that isn't something you learn from that you learn from school necessarily. That's something that you do when you actually get into the field and swim in it. But I think I would say having at the very least an undergrad in international security, and then from there, just, you know, trying different, you know, trying to find a job then and there. I don't necessarily think that grad school is necessary, and depending on sort of, you know, your goal, your end goal, your professional goal may be, you know, at a think tank or in government. I think that's when it really depends. I hope that's helpful. I'm a little bit torn.
Yeah, so well, that was the other question. So two real quick questions for you, and then we can wrap up. So the notion of being torn, do you feel like the two sides of your personality are constantly pulling and tugging at you in different directions? And how do you deal with that?
Oh, totally. There's definitely a category of people that know me as Bombshelltoe, and a category of people that know me as like nuclear security analyst who had a government experience. And I don't necessarily know how they would do if they were in the same room. I think it's just, it's hard. It's hard.
Do you talk differently with the two different groups?
Oh, I code switch all the time. Absolutely. But I would say that it's made Bombshelltoe stronger, because no one can dismiss me as an artist who doesn't know what she's talking about.
Yeah.
because I can say I actually can reference the white paper or treaty that I'm talking about in my artwork.
Yeah.
And so I think it's hard, but it's necessary. And I deal with it by also, again, going back to favorite artists. There are artists that I look up to. Taryn Simon is one of them. Like rigorously researched art. They're not policy people, but in making social commentary, part of their process is research. And so seeing artists like that really inspire me because they can coexist, and it actually strengthens the creative work itself.
Okay, so final question. So we've got about 2 minutes, 1 minute. We've sort of talked for about 45 minutes. What are the, people, again, they're younger people, they're thinking about their careers. What's the one thing you want to leave them as the big takeaway from our conversation?
I would say, yeah, it just goes back to finding your own voice. It's so important. You can learn every single page in a textbook, but if you will stand out if you know who you are and how you want to project that into your work. And just really quickly, the way I did that was to be multidisciplinary. I didn't let go of my artistic self and sacrifice it to be a policy person.
Yeah.
Like I made it work, I made it coexist. And so I would say, in order to find your voice, what are some of the things that you want to mesh together? And it might be ugly and messy, but if it feels right and if it's unique, try that for a little bit and see what happens.
All right, that's great. So thanks so much for taking the time, Lovely. This has been really a lot of fun. And really appreciate you sharing, your story, your insights. I think the people who are going to see this are going to find it very, very helpful. So thank you so much. Lovely Umayam, who is the founder of Bombshelltoe, a creative incubator among artists, community activists, and nuclear experts. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Take care.
Okay.
Thank you.